Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. We have a big challenge here, Jamil, because we are the last ones and we are following the steps of giants. And we are the only thing between these people and getting home at the end of the day. So let's try and make this fun. So we are here to talk about an issue that at some point might have seemed distant. But today, we know it's no longer the case. We see climate change in the face of migrants. We see climate change in the face of the victims of Fiona that recently showed us its wrath in the Dominican Republic. We also see climate change in many things related to the discussions that have taken place here today. For example, top 10 risks of the economy that we are facing today globally. On security, we see it in the impacts of transnational organized crimes, but we also see it on the emerging non-traditional threats to security and so on. Can you talk to us a little bit about these challenges that are related to climate change, how they affect our region in context of the global crises that we're facing today?
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you on this important subject. As you have very clearly and very eloquently summarized in your first question, that's the issue of climate is so broad, the complexity that it brings to us, our lives, this planet, is overwhelming us. We have just seen, I'm coming from the United Nations, where this morning the leaders of the world were discussing, and almost every leader without fail have mentioned the problems that we face today in our daily lives, in our economies, in our societies, posed by the threat of climate change, which is, as we say, an existential threat. It poses a threat to our very existence on the planet. We know how badly the shape of the planet now is. You mentioned droughts and floods. Parts of the planet are underwater. In my own country, Pakistan, 33 million people have been displaced. In Brazil last year, there were heavy floods in 2 states, which displaced a lot of people and caused a damage of more than $3 billion to that economy. So this is a threat which is overwhelming in the fields of security, in migration, in economies. Economies are being put upside down, as we just mentioned, the case of Pakistan and Brazil, but in other parts also. So in the LAC region, for example, like all other regions where there is less capacity to and less resilience to face the threats of climate change, it's exhibiting itself at least in 2 or 3 main areas. Number one, I would say it's food security. Because of the climate change and global warming, the rain patterns have changed, the availability of water is no more predictable. Land has degraded because of global warming, because of glacier melting, and so many other related aspects of climate change. So that has led to the dangers of food security, where crops are not as productive as they used to be before global warming. There's less yield, there is less nutrition, and there is then other related issues of access to fertilizers, access to natural weather, which is more helpful. Then we come to water. We know the tropical glaciers in Andes are melting very fast. In fact, it has lost more than 30% of its cover since 1980. So on the one hand, this glacier melting is leading to water problems, water scarcity also. On the other hand, the LAC region is the region where the sea level rises faster than other regions. So that is then an issue because the sea level rise encroaches upon the lands in islands, in small islands and other coastal areas. We talked about floods and disasters, so that is happening more intensely and more frequently. In a nutshell, we are in a very difficult bind when we talk about the threats of climate change. And we need to the international community need to put its act together to find a way to develop resilience and to develop adaptation, to adapt to the changes, to adapt to the climate change in a better way in the years to come. Otherwise, we will face more serious problems in this issue.
Thank you, Jamil, for putting all that into context. I think that it's clearer than ever that we are living in a society full of risk. Beck's theory was never more relevant than today, in my opinion. And your response makes me wonder about the specific concerns that we have in the region, which, you know, the IPCC has said this, there, water security, extreme events, and risk related to ecosystems. We have over a million species that are threatened today. How can we anticipate better and build that resilience to manage those risks? Today, we have talked a lot about the transitional risk, not about the physical, but how can countries in the region anticipate better, build climate change into their policy response so that we can brace and adapt to the future that awaits for us?
Well, we have the very universally accepted framework of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, which gives us a broader direction to develop resilience to environment and climate change issues. Yesterday, we discussed at the UN a new initiative by the UN for early warning for environmental issues. And that initiative will help developing countries who have less resilience, who are less prepared, least prepared to face the environmental challenge, to develop their capacity for early warning, for warning their populations early about the dangers that they may face from heat waves or floods or cyclones or other environmental issues. At the same time, it will also develop the capacity of the governments and authorities in cities. 80% of population in the LAC region lives in cities. And we have seen recently how urban flooding is affecting big cities. So if we have early warning systems for rains, and we can definitely develop resilient cities to face these problems in the big urban mega cities. At the same time, we will need financial capacities also to be increased. We will need to redirect the financing that is available today in the world towards the goals and targets of environmental issues.
Thank you. And I see the clock ticking, so there are two things that I don't want to escape from our conversation today, and one has to do with the relationship between democracy and rights and climate change, and the other one has to do with the finance piece. And I will start with the democracy piece. Of course, the level of impact will depend on their response, on how prepared our democracies and our institutions are to respond to climate change. Recently, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution on the right to a healthy environment, which presumably will include, you know, the right to a climate system that allows for life. What does that mean, in your opinion, for Latin America, knowing that our constitutions in the majority already include that right?
Thank you. I think in the LAC region, perhaps is the leading region in terms of environmental justice. And that I say because 3 of the main environmental conventions were born in LAC region: the Rio Convention on Climate, on Biodiversity, and on Desertification. But not only that, if we look at the history of the commitments shown in the multilateral world by the LAC countries, that is far ahead. There is commitment to work on the nationally developed contributions to the Paris Agreement. There is the Escazú Agreement for environmental justice and access to information and public information, which guarantees the right to a healthy environment. And with the decision of the Human Rights Council to declare access to healthy environment as a human right, this momentum will grow, and this momentum will increase in a positive way in the region, and it will also have a salutary effect on other regions. So I think the international environmental governance has evolved in the last 50 years to an extent where all the multilateral environmental agreements specifically ask for environmental rights and for rights to a healthy environment in one way or the other. It's only the question of how better and how quickly and how comprehensively we implement these agreements.
So I think that is a great point, and society is finding ways of getting responses sooner and responses that are more effective. And in that regards, we've seen a wave of climate litigation globally, but in the region very strongly. Do you have any thoughts about the role of citizens in enforcing environmental rights and getting a response to the climate crisis that is affecting them on a daily basis?
Well, definitely civil society and ordinary citizens, all of us have a very clear role and responsibility to raise the ante on this and to ask for the implementation of the responsibilities of our own governments. Judiciary can definitely play a significant role in it, but as I said, private citizens, civil society, NGOs, all of them have their part to play.
Thank you, Jamil. And also, in this train of thought that I'm thinking about the traps of development that have been discussed today, Latin America being the most unequal region. Is there anything that you would like to share on the justice piece? How can we reduce that gap of inequality in the context of the rights-based approach?
Well, climate change is itself exacerbating inequality and poverty in many ways. So the first objective in the Sustainable Development Agenda is to alleviate poverty. That's why Goal 1 of SDG is eradication of poverty everywhere. Addressing poverty first, along with the issues of climate change and all other SDGs, is a pathway to that direction. But specifically, in a more technical or a more specific terms, I would say that a just transition to a more sustainable, greener economies will help, because when we move to green economy, it's just not decarbonization, it's just not moving away from fossil fuel. It also would have to guarantee the protection of social rights and labor rights and jobs for people who will have to transit from one way of doing things to another. At the same time, I must say that our current economic paradigm is such which ignores these issues. So we have to develop a new way of doing things in which production is not the ultimate goal, but social justice is also a priority.
So, on that train of thought, in Latin America, we may be poor in many aspects, but we're very wealthy. We're the region that has the most water availability per capita. We have 6 of the most mega biodiverse region. Is there any way that you think the region can capitalize on those benefits and those assets that we have in the context of the economic scenario and the climate talks that are coming up?
Continuing on my previous thought, the current economic system or economic order only takes into account the produced capital. We ignore the natural capital that you are referring to, the natural resources that you are referring to, and the social capital also. UNEP has developed a new index which we call the Inclusive Wealth Index, which not only looks at the produced capital, but also at the financial capital, the human capital, and the social capital. And that is being piloted in several places, and we hope that with the help of the member states in the UN, that will at least guarantee the conservation and the preservation of the natural assets in a way that while development is not compromised, the resources are also not depleted in a bad way.
Well, that is wonderful that we have another alternative to the happiness index and to GDP. But you know, thinking about this, or maybe going into it a little bit deeper, it makes me wonder if regulation has a role. For example, some countries, the Dominican Republic included, and Colombia, are working on green taxonomy in response to regulation in Europe because of trade relations, for example. Are there any good practices or any lessons out there that you think would be beneficial for the region?
In what sense?
In terms of changing the way that we do business and taking into account the natural wealth.
Yes, I think our own organization, UNEP, is also trying to help develop a taxonomy of investment, for example. In the LAC region also, we have had some success in doing some work on this. We are working with the banking sectors, with the stock exchanges, and with investments to see how we can develop principles which can guide green investment in a way that looks after the interest of the future generation, not only of the current needs of our development. So we are doing that in a big way, but aligning the current financial resources with our environmental goals will have to remain the main objective, so that we do not misuse the resources, the financial resources that we have.
So we have two key takeaways. It needs to be in the law, and it also needs to be in the budget. So those are two important things to take home today on climate change. And two more questions, Jamil, on the cooperation piece. Given the inequality and the impacts that the region is suffering without being the greatest emitter of green gas, greenhouse. This is always difficult to say.
Gases.
But what do you think the region can do in Egypt at the COP to be more proactive on the finance? And if you can share a little bit about this 100 billion problem, and how can we leverage, again, the policies and the good practices to see some results and some traction after COP27?
Ahead of COP27, the debate is already heating up on how to generate and mobilize these much-needed finances for adaptation for developing countries. I know this discussion has been going on since 2009, when it was promised that there will be $100 billion generated and mobilized each year after 2020, but unfortunately that has not happened. The recent environmental disasters has brought to the fore the urgency of addressing that issue. So now I think it is already on the agenda of COP27, because in Paris it was agreed that this will be one of the negotiating points for discussion, the issue of loss and damages, the issue of compensation. But in the longer term, I think it will have to be a responsibility and the priority of developing countries themselves, also to not only to wait for the compensation and loss and damages, but to evolve and develop their own resilience and infrastructure in a way that they face these hazards in a more prepared way.
Well, self-determination in a way, another right. So to finalize our talk this afternoon, what do you think? What's the outlook? What would a climate-just future look for Latin America in your view?
I think the future, not only for Latin America, but for all developing countries, in fact, for all the planet, will have to be a transition to a system where we use our resources in a way which is with the thought in our mind that these are not only for us, but for future generations. So a more sustainable way of doing things, where we turn away from fossil fuel, we go to renewables, we look after the inequality and poverty aspects of the people who have no role in global greenhouse gases, but who are in the front line of people who are affected by global warming. So social justice, environmental justice, climate justice, all have to be on the priority for us as we move away and go into an area where the threats of climate change are looming large, but our determination will have to be strong to face that?
Intrinsically and up there with economics, with democracy, human rights, security, education, and all those important things that are at the top of the political agenda, right?
Climate has to be on the top of everything.
Thank you very much, Jamil. This has been fun. Thank you, Natasha, and to all the organizers for the invitation, President Fernandez.